It's funny how quickly they forget about you, until they need something. That's what I thought as I stared at the empty chairs around the dining table. My 65th birthday, the milestone I'd waited for, had come and gone. It should have been a celebration, but instead, it was just a quiet, painful reminder of how easily I had been forgotten by the people who were supposed to be closest to me. I spent the day preparing the house, arranging the perfect setting, and even buying a new dress. It was the dress my late husband used to say made me look elegant, the dress I thought would make me feel beautiful. I set the table with my best china, the candles flickering softly, hoping the warmth would bring everyone together. But when the clock struck 6 p.m., I stood by the door, waiting for someone to walk through it. The first hour passed, then the second, and still, no one came. I called my son, Richard. The call went straight to voicemail. I texted my daughter-in-law, Pamela, asking if they were running late. No reply. My heart sank deeper with every minute that passed, and the empty room felt colder, the silence deafening. By 8 p.m., my heart had already given up on the idea of seeing anyone. The food I had so carefully prepared sat untouched, the candles had burned down to nothing, and the table, once set for celebration, now only served as a cruel reminder of my solitude. I sat there, staring at the now-cold food, trying to convince myself that it was just a mistake. Maybe they'd forgotten. Maybe something had come up. But as I stared at the untouched birthday cake, a sinking feeling in my stomach told me that wasn't the case. No one had forgotten. No one had come because they didn't care. And just as I was about to stand up and clear the table, I opened my phone. I had a notification from Facebook. Pamela had posted a picture of the whole family on a cruise. The caption read, "Living our best life. So grateful for this amazing family getaway." I felt my throat tighten as I stared at the photo. There they were, Richard, Pamela, and the kids, all smiles, surrounded by sunshine and laughter. The picture was taken that very day. The same day I sat alone at this table, pretending to be okay. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was hurt. Hurt in a way that I hadn't felt in years. I thought about all the times I had been there for them, all the sacrifices I had made. And yet, they couldn't even show up for me on my birthday, the day that should have been for me. And then it hit me. They only remembered me when they needed something. I wasn't part of their plans. I was just someone to take advantage of. The realization stung, but I wasn't going to cry over it. I wasn't going to beg for their attention or love. Instead, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide anymore. They thought they could leave me in the background, but I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I wasn't going to be forgotten anymore. I had spent too many years putting everyone else first. It was my turn now, but I wouldn't go to them. I wouldn't beg them for a seat at their table. No, this time, I would make them come to me. The next morning, the silence still hung heavily in the air as I sat at the breakfast table. The uneaten cake from the night before stared back at me from its place on the counter. I had tried to pretend it didn't bother me, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had been deceiving myself. I had convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, it was an honest mistake. Maybe they didn't mean to leave me out. But the truth was now glaring at me, loud and clear. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had chosen not to care. I reached for my coffee, the bitter taste doing little to mask the feeling that had settled deep within me. The warmth of the cup in my hands felt strangely comforting, almost like a quiet signal that I was in control now. It wasn't the first time I had been left behind, but it was the first time I was truly aware of it. The reality of it all was settling in, and it didn't feel like betrayal anymore. It felt like something worse, an intentional erasure of my place in their lives. I had been a part of their world for so long, supporting them, nurturing them, and never asking for anything in return. And yet, when it came time for them to show up for me, I was invisible. I wasn't just left out of their plans, I was forgotten entirely. The sting was sharp, but I refused to let it show. It was time for me to stop being the one who always forgave, the one who always made excuses for their behavior. I wasn't going to beg for their attention or affection. I wasn't going to beg for them to remember me. It was clear now that I had been living my life to please them, to fit into their mold, while they had no intention of ever truly valuing me. And that thought, the realization that I had given so much and received so little, was enough to make me see things differently. I was done. I wasn't going to let them treat me like a backup, like an afterthought. I wasn't going to wait for their approval or their recognition anymore. I had spent enough of my life trying to hold on to relationships that were only holding me back. It was time to let go. For the first time, I felt a sense of power in that decision. A decision that wasn't born out of anger or bitterness, but out of self-respect. I didn't need their validation to be happy. I didn't need their love to know my worth. I had been through too much in my life to let this break me. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their world, a world where I was nothing more than a convenient asset. I had my own life to live now, and I would no longer shrink myself to fit into their expectations. I set my coffee cup down and stood up. The house felt empty, but not in the way it had before. Now, it felt like a fresh start. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I wasn't going to beg for their presence in my life. From now on, it was about me. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about punishing them or seeking revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine, my own life, my own happiness, my own space. And I was ready to take it. It had been a few days since I had made the decision to cut ties with my family. It felt like a strange sense of relief, but at the same time, it was hard to shake off the old habits of waiting for a call or looking at the phone, expecting someone to reach out. I kept telling myself that I was done with them, that I was better off without their false affection, but it still stung. The phone remained silent, and with every passing day, the reality that they weren't coming back, that they had moved on without me, started to sink in deeper. I had spent so many years trying to please them, to be there when they needed me, to always be the one who forgave. But now, in this quiet, empty house, I finally realized that it was never about love. It was always about convenience. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, not just at them, but at myself for allowing it to go on for so long. I had let them treat me like a placeholder in their lives. It was time to change that. I knew that I had to do something for myself, for the first time in my life. The thought of starting fresh, living for me, filled me with a sense of power. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had made it this far without them, and I could keep going. I could make my own choices and live the life I wanted, not the life they had planned for me. But there was still one thing that bothered me. Even though I had cut ties with them, I wasn't sure how to handle the wealth I had inherited. The house, the savings, the investments. It was all mine now, but it felt strange to have it all without anyone to share it with. For so long, I had lived for others. Now, I had everything I needed, but I was still left with this emptiness. I thought about the future, about what I could do with the money, the freedom, the chance to rebuild my life. There were so many possibilities, but it felt overwhelming. I couldn't just sit on it all. I needed to make a change. I decided to take some time for myself, away from the house, away from the memories. I would travel, see the world, and experience life the way I had always wanted to, without worrying about the expectations of others. I didn't need their approval or their presence. I could do this on my own. The next morning, I booked a flight to the coast. It wasn't a grand adventure or a bucket list destination, but it was something I had always wanted to do. Something simple, something just for me. As the plane took off, I looked out the window at the vast expanse of the ocean, feeling a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. This was my life now, and it was up to me to make the most of it. No one else could define who I was or what I did. It was all mine to control. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally on the right path. I didn't need them. I had me. It was a few weeks after my trip to the coast, and life had settled into an unfamiliar, yet surprisingly peaceful rhythm. I had spent those days reflecting on what I wanted from my life. Now that I was free from the weight of family obligations and the constant disappointment that had followed me for years, the world seemed a little different from this new perspective. I didn't feel the need to rush back into the same old patterns. The house was quiet when I returned, but this time it wasn't oppressive. It was my space now, truly mine, without the expectation of anyone's presence or approval. I had thought about the money I had inherited, about the house and the assets, but it wasn't until I returned that I realized just how much control I had over my own destiny. I didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't have to explain my choices. It felt liberating, but there was still a small part of me that wondered what my family would think if they knew I was truly free. I knew they had been watching from afar, waiting for me to reach out, maybe expecting me to beg for their attention again. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Not this time. Instead, I focused on what I wanted, my own happiness, my own peace. I started making plans for the future, figuring out where I wanted to live, what kind of life I wanted to build for myself. The wealth I had was a tool, but it wasn't the end goal. I had learned over the years that material things didn't bring true fulfillment. It was the freedom to choose, the freedom to be who I was without the shadow of my family's expectations that gave me the greatest joy. And just when I thought I had finally settled into this new chapter, my phone rang. I hesitated for a moment before answering. It was my son, Richard. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, not since the day I cut ties with them. He sounded different, calmer, but there was an edge to his voice that I couldn't quite place. "Mom," he said, his tone hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about things lately. About you. And I'm sorry. I know I haven't been the best son. I want to make things right." My heart didn't race. It didn't skip a beat. I just listened. The words he said were empty to me now. Apologies didn't change the past, didn't undo the years of neglect. "I appreciate you reaching out, Richard," I replied, my voice steady. "But I've moved on. I'm not angry, but I don't need to go back to what was. I've built something new, something for myself." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the disappointment in his silence. "I understand," he finally said, "but I want you to know that I'm here if you need me." I couldn't help but smile at the irony of it all. All these years of waiting for him to see me, to care, and now that I didn't need him, he was the one reaching out. I knew it wasn't for me. It was for him, for his own guilt. "Thank you, Richard. But I'm fine," I said softly. "I've been fine for a long time now." After we hung up, I felt nothing. No anger, no regret. Just peace. It wasn't a victory. It was simply the reality of living for myself. I didn't need him to validate me anymore, and I didn't need his apologies. The life I was building was mine, and no one could take that from me. I smiled to myself, feeling lighter than I had in years. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for them. Not for anyone. I was finally living for me. The weeks passed, and the sense of freedom I had gained from cutting ties with my family began to settle into my daily routine. I started focusing on the small joys, things I hadn't had the luxury of appreciating in years. I took long walks around the neighborhood, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the sun on my skin, something that used to feel so ordinary, but now felt like a gift. For the first time in years, I was waking up without the weight of expectation on my shoulders. I was no longer waiting for anyone to call, to visit, or to need something from me. I began exploring hobbies I had forgotten, reading books I hadn't had time for, and even started writing again, something I hadn't done since my younger years. It felt like I was rediscovering parts of myself that I had buried under the weight of family obligations. But there were still moments when the silence would creep in, when I'd catch myself thinking about them. About my son, about the years of my life spent in the background, ignored until they needed something. I had tried so hard to fit into their lives, to be the mother, the grandmother, the woman they could rely on. But now, I realized I was just a footnote in their stories. And that was fine. I didn't need them anymore. The more I reflected, the more I understood that the relationships I had with my family were based on conditions, on what I could provide, on my usefulness. Once I stopped giving, I was no longer needed. But that was not my burden to carry. I had spent too many years allowing myself to be treated as disposable. Now, I was living for me. One afternoon, while I was going through old letters in the attic, I came across a photo of me and my son from when he was a child. He looked so happy, so full of life. I remembered those days with such clarity, the late-night talks, the laughter, the family dinners we used to have. But as I stared at that picture, I felt no longing, no desire to go back. The past was gone, and so was my role in it. I had been the one who had kept things together, who had smoothed over the cracks and fixed the problems. But now, I realized that no amount of fixing could change the fact that they had already chosen a different path, one without me in it. The photo remained in my hands, but I didn't feel the need to keep it anymore. I placed it in a box and pushed it to the back of the closet. It was time to let go. As much as I had loved my family, I had to accept that love, for them, had always been conditional. And once I was no longer useful to them, I became invisible. But I wasn't invisible to myself. I knew my worth now. I was worthy of love, of happiness, and of peace. I didn't need their approval or validation. The journey I had started was mine, and it wasn't defined by them. It was my own story, my own life. And I wasn't looking back. It was an ordinary Wednesday when the unexpected phone call came. I had spent the morning at the park, breathing in the fresh air, listening to the birds, feeling at peace with my solitude. For the first time in a long time, I truly felt content. But the call shattered that peace. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. It was Richard, my son. The sound of his voice, though calm, carried an underlying tension. "Mom, I know it's been a while, but I've been thinking about things," he said. I didn't respond right away. It had been months since we last spoke, and the emptiness of those months had been filled with a sense of freedom, one that I had come to cherish. I wasn't sure what he wanted, but I wasn't eager to open that door again. "I've been thinking a lot," Richard continued. "About everything. About us. About how I've treated you. And I wanted to apologize. I realize now that I haven't been there for you." His words were laced with guilt, but it was the kind of guilt that came too late. I had been waiting for this moment for so long, hoping he would finally see me, see what I had done for him, for the family. But now, I wasn't sure what to do with this apology. The woman I was now didn't need it. "I appreciate your words, Richard," I said calmly, my voice steady. "But it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the fact that I've been forgotten, that I've been pushed aside for years." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, perhaps unsure of how to respond. "I know, Mom, and I've been a bad son. I've been selfish, and I'm sorry for that. But I want to make it right." "Making it right," I repeated, tasting the words on my tongue. "You can't make it right with an apology. You can't undo the years of neglect, of pretending I didn't matter." Richard's voice faltered, but he didn't give up. "I know it's not going to fix everything, but I just want you to know that I regret how things turned out. I've been selfish, and I want to change that." I took a deep breath, looking out the window at the autumn leaves blowing across the yard. The trees stood tall, unaffected by the seasons, unshaken by the changes around them. It was a reminder to me that I too could stand tall, regardless of what had happened. "I don't need you to make up for the past, Richard," I said, my words final, but not harsh. "I've moved on. I've let go of the idea of being needed by you or anyone else. I'm living my life now for me." His silence was deafening, and I could almost feel the weight of his disappointment. I wasn't going to beg for his love or approval anymore. I had spent too many years doing that. "I understand, Mom," he said after a moment. "I just want you to know I love you. I've always loved you." I closed my eyes, taking in the finality of his words. I knew he did. But love, real love, wasn't about words, it was about actions. And for all these years, his actions had spoken louder than any apology could. "I love you too, Richard," I replied, my voice softer now, not out of weakness, but out of acceptance. "But I'm not the same woman I was before. I'm different now, and I'm okay with that." The line went quiet once more, and I knew this conversation was over. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a necessary one. I had made my peace, and I didn't need him to make it for me. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't willing to go back. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone. The days after my conversation with Richard were quieter than I expected. I had anticipated feeling some kind of weight, some emotional shift, but there was nothing. The house remained as peaceful as it had been when I returned from my trip. I had stopped waiting for their calls, stopped hoping they would come back into my life when they needed something. And surprisingly, it felt freeing. I was living my life for the first time, with no expectations, no obligations to anyone but myself. But as the weeks went by, I started to notice something. A subtle shift in my routine, a quiet yearning that I couldn't quite place. The truth was, the space I had carved for myself was comfortable, but it was also empty. I realized that as much as I had cut ties with my family, I still missed the idea of them, their presence, their warmth. Not their demands, not their neediness, but the connection, the love I had always given, even when it was never fully returned. I hadn't allowed myself to miss them before, but now I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't a longing for their approval, nor was it a desire to go back to the way things were. It was something more profound, a recognition that family, for all its flaws, was something I had craved, something I had once believed in with all my heart. I spent a lot of time walking through the neighborhood, thinking about everything that had happened. I found comfort in the simple things, the crunch of leaves beneath my feet, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the laughter of children playing in the park. The world outside my house was still moving, still full of life. And it made me realize that my life, too, could still be full, even without them. I didn't need them to fill the emptiness I felt. I had the power to do that myself. And yet, There were moments when I would sit by the window, staring out at the world, and I would catch myself thinking about Richard, about his family, wondering if they ever thought about me. I knew the answer. Of course, they didn't. But still, there was a small part of me that hoped they would. I wanted them to understand, to realize what they had lost, but I also knew that wasn't my burden to bear. It wasn't up to me to make them see my worth. And that was the turning point. The moment I stopped caring about whether they saw me at all. I had spent so much of my life trying to get their attention, trying to get them to love me the way I loved them. But now, I was no longer going to chase that. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of affection. I wasn't going to wait for their approval. I had given them everything I had, and now it was time to take it all back. I had started building a new life, one that was for me and me alone. And in that, I found strength. Strength in knowing that I was enough, with or without them. The world wasn't waiting for their approval of me. It was waiting for me to approve of myself. And in that quiet realization, I finally understood what it meant to be free. It was a cool morning when the call came again, this time from Pamela. I had been waiting for it, in a way. I had expected that they would try again, that they would eventually reach out once more, but I wasn't sure how I would respond. As the phone rang, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't angry anymore, not like I had been when I first cut ties. I wasn't seeking closure, and I certainly wasn't looking for an apology. I simply wasn't interested in playing their game anymore. I picked up the phone, and as soon as I heard Pamela's voice, I recognized the tension in it. "Mom," she said, and there was a pause, as if she were trying to find the right words. "I've been thinking about everything, about the way things ended, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Her words were polite, and they carried the weight of someone who had rehearsed them. I could hear it in her voice. She was trying to sound sincere, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. I took a deep breath before responding, not rushing to speak, but letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. "I appreciate you reaching out, Pamela," I said, my voice even. "But you and I both know that sorry doesn't fix anything. It doesn't erase the years I spent waiting for you and Richard to care." The words were calm, but they hit harder than I intended. Pamela was silent on the other end for a moment, probably processing my response, trying to figure out where she stood in this conversation. "I know, Mom," she said finally, her voice softer now, but still carrying that undertone of expectation. "But I really want to make things right. I've been thinking about how things went wrong, and I realize I didn't show you the respect you deserved." I could feel the weight of her words, but instead of feeling relief or validation, I felt an odd emptiness. Her apology, her attempt at reaching out, it all felt hollow. I wasn't looking for validation anymore. I had spent so many years trying to find my worth through them, through their approval, their love. But now, I had learned that I didn't need any of that. "Making things right," I repeated slowly. "What does that mean, Pamela? What does making things right even look like at this point?" There was another long pause. I could hear her breathing, steady but unsure. "I don't know," she admitted. I want to fix it if I can. I want things to be good between us." Her words felt like they were trying to stitch together a relationship that had already been torn apart beyond repair. And as I listened, I realized that fixing it wasn't up to me. I had done everything I could. I had spent decades trying to make them see me, trying to make them love me in the way I had always wanted. But now I was done. I wasn't looking to go back to a place of constant disappointment. I wasn't going to spend another day waiting for them to show up for me. "I understand that you want to make things right," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But the truth is, Pamela, I've already moved on. I've already let go of the idea that I need anything from you or Richard. I'm living my life now, and it's the first time in years that I feel free." The words felt final as I said them, and I knew in my heart that there was no going back after this. I wasn't angry at her, or Richard, or anyone else in my family. I was simply indifferent. It was a kind of peace I hadn't known before. There was a shift in the air after I spoke, like something had settled into place. I wasn't looking for reconciliation, for closure, or for validation anymore. I had done that work on my own. "I hope you understand, Pamela," I said quietly, "but I'm not going to change my mind. I've made peace with everything, and I don't need anything from you." After a long silence, she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay, Mom," she said, her words carrying the weight of finality. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry." I felt no anger, no bitterness, only an overwhelming sense of calm. "I know, Pamela," I said softly. And that's enough. When the call ended, I sat there for a while, staring out the window. I realized, in that moment, that I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. I wasn't waiting for their love or their approval. I wasn't waiting for them to come back into my life. I had built my life from the ground up, on my own terms, and that was enough. As the months passed, I found myself adjusting to the quiet rhythm of life. The freedom I had embraced was no longer just a novelty, but a new way of being. I was no longer confined to the house, or the family, or the past that had defined so much of my life. I could choose how to spend my time, who to spend it with, and where to go. I didn't need anyone's permission. The world, once a place of endless expectations, now felt open, filled with possibilities. But there were days when the quietness of the house felt almost too peaceful, a little too still. It was during those moments that I would remember the years I had spent waiting, hoping, for a call, for a sign that they saw me, that they loved me. But then, the truth would hit me again. They hadn't. They hadn't shown up when it mattered, and now, I was no longer waiting for them to. It was in these moments that I would smile softly to myself. I had learned to rely on myself, and the weight of that realization was something I had never truly felt before. I had become my own source of strength, my own sense of purpose. For the first time, I wasn't living for anyone else. I was living for me. As I sat by the window one evening, the sun setting behind the trees, I realized how far I had come. The woman who had once given so much of herself to others, hoping for a fraction of that love in return, was no longer there. She had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who didn't need validation from anyone else. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first made the decision to let go. I had grown. I had learned that I could fill the emptiness with my own joy, with my own peace, and that it was more than enough. The phone had stopped ringing, and that used to bother me. Now it didn't. It wasn't a sign of being forgotten. It was a sign of freedom. No one was pulling me in different directions anymore. I was free to choose, free to live on my own terms. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt complete. One day, while I was out running errands, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. Her name was Clara, and we had been close years ago before life had taken us in different directions. She smiled when she saw me, and we exchanged a few pleasantries. "You look different," she said, her eyes studying me for a moment. "You look happy." I smiled, not feeling the need to explain everything. "I am," I replied simply. It wasn't a lie. I truly was. As I left the store that day, I couldn't help but reflect on the conversation. Clara was right. I was happy, not because I had everything I once thought I needed, but because I had found contentment in myself. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. I wasn't depending on anyone's love. I was enough, just as I was. And that was the greatest gift I could give myself. Life was no longer about fitting into the expectations of others. It was about carving out my own path, one that felt true to who I had become. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of the person I had become. I wasn't waiting for my family to return. I wasn't waiting for their apology. I wasn't waiting for anything. I was living. And in that living, I found peace.